So thanks for joining me again this week. We've had a busy week in Montgomery County due to our most significant snowfall in the past 3 years. But first I'd like to take a moment to express our thoughts and concerns for those living in Southern California who are dealing with an incredible outbreak of wildfires due in part to the Santa Ana winds. These wildfires and the damage they're causing and threats to life they pose is a somber message of the importance of continuing to work to combat climate change. Just as we saw with devastating floods throughout the southeastern part of the United States last fall, no state or part of the world is immune to the increased frequency and severity of these events. This only highlights the urgency of doing the work to create more sustainable practices that require investing in resiliency and remaining committed to the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions that is leading to these tragic impacts of climate change. I thought this comment from LA City Council member Tracy Parks, who represents the most impacted area of Pacific Palisades. And what she said was that, quote, chronic underinvestment in the city of Los Angeles in our public infrastructure, end of quote, was at fault for the massive destruction from these fires. As always, I want to encourage you to help and support those in need by considering donating to the Red Cross, Salvation Army, and other credible nonprofits that are working to assist victims. It's hard to sum up the massive effort undertaken in response to our biggest winter storm in years. Our response to this storm started long before the first snowflake fell and continues into this week. The county remained in a cold emergency alert throughout most of the week because of the dangerously cold weather. The wind chill made it feel like it was below 20 degrees. Those conditions can result in frostbite on exposed skin within 30 minutes and/or hypothermia. Our 650 snow removal crews worked throughout the week to remove snow and ice from 1,661 miles of primary roads and more than 3,600 miles of residential roads in the county. We will continue to respond to the public and return to areas where ice remains. This was a two-tiered storm that required more attention on primary roads than it was initially believed. It started, it stopped, and then it started again. And when it started again, areas that had been plowed or been treated now fell under more snow than had been anticipated. This is worse than if it had been a continuous storm. Some roads have proven more challenging than others. Because of that, some snow removal crews had to temporarily switch to steel-tipped plows. The county prefers to limit the use of that equipment because of the damage it can have on the road itself. Our county also worked to keep people without housing out of the cold. Our shelters were at capacity, but in some locations, because of the storm, extra accommodations were made to ensure safety. While a snow day is often fun for kids, those who get out of work all day, for our entire government, is multiple days and long hours of very difficult and sometimes dangerous work. This was an all-hands-on-deck effort, including employees with our regional services centers, public information officers, 911 and 311 dispatchers, and council members who took questions, dealt with issues, and put out proactive communications. I also want to thank our partners at the Maryland Department of Transportation, State Police, the Maryland Department of Emergency Management, the Metropolitan Council of Governments, and the National Weather Service for their collaborative efforts. I want to remind everyone that libraries, senior centers, and recreation centers are open during normal hours as a place to stay warm. And if more snow falls over the coming days, and apparently we're going to see some this weekend, we encourage you to use our snow removal request form that can be found on our website to report roads that need attention. Let's hope we're done with this bitter cold soon. And I want to thank again all of our employees who worked so hard this week, and to all the residents who looked out and helped their neighbors and their communities. One of the other gifts that the storm brought were water main breaks. On Monday, we also worked closely with WSSC as we had a significant water main break in downtown Bethesda. WSSC moved quickly to repair significant pipe damage as quickly as possible, and I didn't expect this to be the last water main break that we're going to see in the county. WSSC tracks the temperature of the Potomac River because it often correlates with water main breaks. When the river temperature gets too low, like it did last week, they typically see an increase in broken pipes. Older pipes are most impacted by the colder water, causing them to break. Approximately 40% of the water mains in the WSSC system are over 50 years old. The pipe that broke this week on Wisconsin Avenue was originally installed in 1932, approximately 93 years old. This is another example of the infrastructure investment needs that we tend to year after year. I encourage you to check out WSSC's website that has tips on how to make sure you know how to best take care of the water pipes at your home or dwelling, as well as being prepared and alerted to any water main breaks in your area. That website is wsscwater.com/winter-ready. As we clean up from the snowstorm, I want to highlight the collaboration between our Department of Environmental Protection and WSSC Water on the SaltWise campaign. We've encouraged all our departments to adopt sustainable salt use practices to protect water quality and the environment. For example, the Department of Transportation monitors road temperatures to limit the use of salt brine that it applies to the road. Excessive salt used to de-ice pavement and asphalt can damage our infrastructure and threaten public health. WSSC warns that rising salt levels in rivers cannot be filtered, potentially posing health risks. By being careful with salt use, you can help reduce salt runoff into drinking water sources like the Potomac and Patuxent rivers. To be salt-wise, shovel early in a storm and often to prevent an ice buildup. Limit the amount of salt used to 1.5 cups of salt per 10 sidewalk squares. That is an equivalent of a 20-foot driveway. Sweep and reuse excess salt after the ice is gone. Excess salt can be used again, so if you see it piling up, scrape it up and put it back in a container and use it for the next storm. Excessive salt use can be reported by calling 311. Keep our community and our environment in mind all winter long as we work together to safeguard our collective resources. You can learn about Clean Water Montgomery campaign and more about protecting our water supply by visiting montgomerycountymd.gov/salt. This week was the start of the 2025 General Assembly session in Annapolis. I was glad to be there for the official start of this session on Wednesday. We've laid out many of our legislative priorities, which you can read by visiting montgomerycountymd.gov/OIR. The state is also facing an unprecedented budget deficit of close to $3 billion, which requires immediate attention to protect Maryland's AAA bond rating, also to maintain services in the state. The stakes couldn't be higher, and the decisions made by this session can impact every jurisdiction in Maryland, including Montgomery County. No small part of this was the rising cost of health care. For Montgomery County, this means continuing to prioritize key investments that are critical to our economic growth and sustainability. Projects like Bus Rapid Transit, WMATA, and the Institute for Health Computing are essential not just for our county, but they're essential for the entire state. I also support the ongoing conversation about modernizing Maryland's transportation financing structure to ensure that it meets the needs of all regions equitably and effectively. For the state to turn this budget around, we are going to have to create more jobs. This is not a one-year project, which is tied to a better transportation infrastructure, providing a high quality of education and robust workforce training. We learned from the Amazon bid process, and it's what I hear from nearly every company I've met with. People don't realize that part of the state's bid for Amazon was a very large investment in transit in the 355 corridor. That corridor remains our prime target for economic growth, and the transportation needs are real. The state is also focused on addressing the goals of the blueprint for Maryland's future while navigating the current physical realities. It's clear the state does not have the physical capacity to stay on track to fund the full blueprint on the timeline that was anticipated. Whatever adjustments are made, the first thing should be to focus on those changes that would be most impactful for the students, rather than spreading money over so many objectives that the funding isn't adequate for any of them. Nor can the costs of this be dumped on local governments who have their own increased financial burdens to deal with. Our local school system has real challenges that have been ignored for too long, independent of the costs that come with the blueprint. As a former school teacher, I'm well aware that 3 of the most determining factors of a child's educational development are what they're exposed to when they're very young in terms of language, social skills, and numeracy, as well as parental engagement and later teacher engagement. Many classrooms require lower student-to-teacher ratios. Unfortunately, nationally and here in Maryland, we continue to face a consistent shortage of teachers, which is in no small part driven by low pay and the lack of classroom supports. My initial impression is that the new superintendent Thomas Taylor is taking this seriously, focusing on things that are most impactful in the classroom, trimming administration, and being cognizant that they need to get their healthcare costs under control. I give Superintendent Taylor credit for being frank with the financial situation we are in and with our schools, and recognizing the need to slim down administration costs within MCPS. This is a budget debate that's going to play out in Rockville and every other county seat in the state, and also in Annapolis. And although the budget, infrastructure, and education funding debate will dominate a lot of the discussion in Annapolis, there are still lots of other priorities and issues that we will be here advocating for. The one thing I've learned about working with the General Assembly over my years in Maryland politics is that persistence is a good thing. There are several issues we will continue to work with the state on, such as reckless driving, prescription drug costs, and policies that will create more affordable housing, and in this regard, particularly creating more ownership opportunities. We've seen a willingness on the federal and state levels to support rental housing assistance, but an emphasis needs to be placed on supporting home ownership programs. While there are multiple state programs to help lower the cost of rental construction, no such programs are in place to help with creating ownership opportunities. I think we can make headway on this issue during the session. On the economic development front, we have shared our experiences in trying to attract some major companies to the county and the lack of state incentives that match what can be found elsewhere. The county alone cannot meet the incentives offered by states, and the state has not adequately funded state programs to promote economic development. I was very encouraged to see not just words but actions from the governor to strengthen our ability to be more competitive. And where we failed most is in the building of the transit system we need. We need to convince companies that we can take the infrastructure that we show on paper and actually bring it to light. Virginia is the poster child for how to do this, and we've ignored what they've done for far too long. One major consultant compared our situation vis-a-vis Northern Virginia. He said that if a company is choosing between us and Fairfax, they'll ask which county can deliver the infrastructure in their master plans in a timely way. And a consultant would tell them, Virginia will do it. But we have no idea what or when Montgomery County could deliver the infrastructure. That's because our plans have no funding for infrastructure tied to them. We have no idea when we do a master plan where we're going to find the money to build the pieces of the master plan that we need to build. We have so much else going for us, but to score badly on infrastructure is something we should and can fix. In a recent study that got publicized, Virginia was rated number 3 in infrastructure, and Maryland was rated number 34. As always, I appreciate the partnership we share with the Montgomery County delegation, Governor Moore's administration, and the General Assembly. Every time I visit Annapolis, I'm there to listen, learn, and offer my help in any way that moves our common goals forward. This week, I welcome Delegate Julie Polakovich-Carr to my media briefing. She's chair of the Montgomery County House delegation and also serves on the Ways and Means and the Joint Audit and Evaluation Committee. Here's a portion of what she shared with us during the media briefing.
Whatever revenue solutions we come up with this session, that there isn't a disproportionate impact to Montgomery County, and also making sure that we are defending our priorities. I mentioned bus rapid transit earlier. That has been a great partnership with the county executive and with the county and our delegation to bring in new funding for the planning and hopefully at some point construction of more BRT lines throughout the county, and we hope to continue to make progress on that front.
Since my last video, we've seen the 119th Congress sworn in and the start of the 2025 Maryland General Assembly. There are many changes to note compared to just a year ago. I want to thank Senator Ben Cardin for his decades of public service, and I want to welcome Senator-elect Angela Alsobrooks, whose historic election is a milestone for Maryland. I also want to welcome April McLean Delaney as another new Congress member, joining the county's congressional delegation. I find it empowering that in Maryland we elect women and minorities to positions of power, and that change is not just lip service. I commend Representative Jamie Raskin on his new role as ranking member of the House Judiciary Committee. His leadership will be crucial to ensuring the incoming administration adheres to this nation's laws and Constitution. With Republicans now leading the House and Senate, we must prepare for the challenges that this shift may bring, from potential impacts on federal funding to policies critical to Montgomery County, like addressing climate change and promoting equity. We're also concerned about the threats made about mass deportations, which would be devastating to families, businesses, and communities here. We are full into creating our own operating and capital budgets for the coming year. We are planning based on current revenues, but we may have to make changes in mid-year depending on how damaging new federal policies are to our traditional sources of federal support. As always, we'll continue advocating for our residents and for our shared values. I want to point out an important message to the community shared by County Council Vice President Will Jawanda this week about the Attainable Housing Strategies Initiative, AHS as it's called. This was put forward for council consideration by the Montgomery County Planning Board last summer, and it was the subject of multiple community meetings throughout the fall. In his statement, Councilmember Jawanda suggested putting the recommendations from this plan on hold indefinitely. I agree with this, and the main reason behind it. As I've repeatedly said since the Attainable Housing Plan was shared publicly, it does not address our most pressing need, which is affordable housing. Spending time and resources in any housing plan that does not add to, protect, or preserve affordable housing stock does not help us address our goals or our problems. As Councilmember Jawanda said, stable and affordable housing is a critical issue for individuals and families that cannot wait. It is baffling in my mind that Council would proceed with something that was not asked for by the community. No one asked the Council or the Planning Board to just rezone the entire county. In fact, when there was finally a chance to weigh in, feedback was overwhelmingly negative. Those concerns should be taken seriously. This plan is flawed because it does not reflect what people want, and that's just the starting point. The infuriating thing is that we already have master plans in place that took community feedback into consideration when developing these growth plans. I was on one of those planning committees under County Executive Doug Duncan, and I saw the value in bringing people together to discuss the shape of development in order to make sure everybody's needs were met in an honest and meaningful way. The Planning Board no longer does that. They minimize public engagement and give residents no voice in the creation of these plans. Residents on the eastern side of the county and the western side are examples of population clusters that are very clearly having serious concerns with AHS. The AHS proposal would upzone 82% of single-family homes. That would be an enormous change for our county that we would not be ready for. Not only that, but this all stems from a recommendation from COG that the 2030 projection for the number of housing units that are needed should be increased by 10,000 units. You don't need to rezone 82% of the county to find places for 10,000 units. In fact, those places are already there. Not only that, but it's not necessary to account for the projected growth because the Planning Board refuses to acknowledge updated projections and the analysis from Washington Metropolitan Council of Governments that said way back in 2019 when this started that we do not need to rezone in the way the AHS proposes we do in order to provide capacity for the housing. It is ludicrous and outrageous that the Planning Board refuses to acknowledge that this county and all the counties in COG have already planned for future growth. Montgomery Planning is simply trying to change housing policies they don't like. Mostly their notion is that single-family housing is bad, unless apparently it's west of Falls Road and in Potomac, while allowing others to argue that this will help our affordable housing situation when it clearly will not. They actually have on the page for attainable housing, they ask themselves the question, is this about affordable housing? And they say, no, this is market rate housing. This is a deceptive way to accomplish their goals and not in the county's best interest and completely outside the county's tradition of planning. This week, the country remembered and honored the late President Jimmy Carter. Mourners lined up in the bitter cold outside the Capitol to pay tribute to our 39th president. On Thursday, the National Cathedral held state funeral services for President Carter. The later stages of President Carter's life allowed us to see his humanity. His work with Habitat for Humanity began more than 40 years ago. He elevated its profile and brought tens of thousands of volunteers to the program, giving more low-income families a way to earn a new home that they own. If you're not familiar with how large the organization has grown, it's now in 70 countries. Please visit habitat.org. Foreign nations turned to President Carter to be a calming peacemaker who helped promote peace and justice and worked to end strife. He also cared about our impact on the environment, pushed energy conservation, and was the first person to discuss using solar panels to heat water. Those ideals helped lay the foundation for governments like ours to reduce the carbon emissions. President Carter's life reminds us that leadership is not bound by titles or terms. It's about making the world better every day and in every way we can. His legacy will continue to inspire generations to come. That's a wrap for today. I hope you have a great week. I hope this weekend's snow is not too miserable and that I'll be back again next week.